Hey there, welcome back. Today we'll be diving into a must-know React concept, props. And if you're curious about how data moves between components, you're in the right place. So what are props? In React, they are like data packages that allow components to communicate and share information. Without them, components would remain static. They make components dynamic and reusable, enabling endless possibilities for interaction and flexibility. In a theory, let's jump into coding part and see how it works. So for this lesson, we will continue with where we left off in last session. In CSS file, I have added few extra styles for the buttons and some style changes in the header section. I will just add this file in description for you to refer. Now let us go to the header component and make some small changes. I will just fix the typo and change the position for image tag so it gets a bit organized. As you can see, next thing we'll just start by adding props to the image component. Currently the image is being used in two places and both of them is returning same image, which seems hard-coded. So to make it dynamic, we need to use props. I have prepared an image for this. You can use any image that you want. So let's go to the image component and I will add props. We can do that by adding TypeScript interface. So you type interface and the props name, which defines the structure of the props. And here it will be expecting two things, source and title, both of type string. Now this enforces type safety, ensuring any object passed to the component follows this defined structure. So here in the image method, we will be expecting two arguments, source and title, which is defined in image props. Now we can just modify the src attribute to pass source data and remove alt attribute to add title, which will be displayed on hover action. As you can see, we are getting errors in the content and the header component. That is because we haven't passed that props yet or props data yet. So we'll go to the header component and we will add those two attributes that is expected. I will just import the image logo that I have prepared, which is in asset folder and React logo. Next would be adding source attribute with value logo that we just imported and title as logo image. So this fixed the header component. Now the other error we were getting was in content component. So we'll do the same thing there. Here also we'll import the new image, assigning name as content image, which we are taking from the asset folder. And we will repeat the same process by adding attribute source as content image that we just imported and the title as content image. Now if we save this, we'll see that all the errors are gone. Also, if you notice, we have different image on both the places, on content and the header, and on hover action you'll see the title data that we have assigned to it. There are some scenarios in which data will not be available. Let's say we don't have any title for an image. In that case, we can just make that props field optional. We can just do that by adding question mark to the property field. So if you go and delete the title, we will not see any data on hover action. Plus it will not throw any error as it's optional. And what if we pass different data type? Let's say we pass number, which is not expected by props. It will throw an exception error as it was expecting string but number was given. Alright, let's try making another component dynamic using props. Right now, as you can see, the button component seems to be static, meaning it's returning the same data in both sidebar and content section. So let's go to the button component and start adding props using the TypeScript interface. We'll just start with few obvious things that can make this button dynamic. One is the text on the button. So we will make that dynamic. We also want to control the type of the button. It could be a standard button, a submit button, or even a reset button. And finally, the button can either be enabled or disabled, and we'll keep it optional. And that type would be a Boolean value. It could be true or false. Now let's go to the button component to make changes for accepting props. So we can do that by passing text, type and disabled in argument of the button method, and then we will update the attributes of button elements to accept these arguments that we added. For example, we will assign type prop to the type attribute in the button markup and the disabled prop to the disabled attribute. And also let's make the text dynamic. Okay, it looks like we forgot to specify the type of the props passed to this method. We can easily fix that by defining the button props. As I mentioned earlier, this approach helps minimize errors and improves overall code quality. So let me just add the type of props that we are passing, button props. But wait, as we can see, we are still getting other errors because we haven't implemented all the mandatory fields created in props. So let's go to the content and add those attributes. So the button, we have text submit. Here type would be submit and disabled, let's say false. Similarly, I'll just copy this and go and fix in the sidebar section. So for the text, we can right click here. For the type would be button and disable, let's say we'll just keep it false for now. So I'll just go here and make the changes and see whether it's getting reflected. As you can see in the UI, we are seeing the disabled version of it. Okay, so that's working. Now we can make this button look a bit nicer. I've added some CSS for styling buttons to make it more practical. The button common, button submit, button reset and button normal. So by default, every button will have a base class called button common. Let me just show you. So in the class name, I will add button common and then button submit, which will give a green version of the button. And if we do button reset, we are getting the red variation. And for button normal, we are getting the blue one. So I'll just use the template literal to make it dynamic. So let me just add button common and button type. Okay. If the submit is working, but the normal button is not working, that is because the type we are passing as button and we don't have any class called button. So let me just create a variable for it, which will return the button class type. So let button type class, and based on the type, so if type equal to button, then we will return normal, else we'll just return the type. Yeah, so let me just copy this and replace it with the type. As you can see, the normal version of the button is fixed as well. So let me just create one variation of it just to show how both the buttons will look. So we have a submit variation and I'm creating a reset variation. As you can see, we have all the three variations of the button: normal, submit and reset. As of now, we are still missing code for button disabled functionality. So even if I make this true, nothing is reflected on UI. So for this, we will go to the button component and make changes there. Just to show you how it looks, if I add button disabled class, we can see the disabled version in the UI. Now we can add the logic here in the button method itself, but what if more changes comes to look and feel of the button? At that point, this method will get bloated. So to make it cleaner, let's create a new method to get the class name of button and implement all logic there. Okay, let's create a separate helper function called getClassName. So this function will accept two arguments: the type of the button and whether it's disabled or not, which would be a Boolean value. And we will just return a string value for this method that we are creating. Now the final string value would have something like a button common as the base class and an additional class based on the type of the button. So let me just add a local variable to set the base class, which would be button common. And as you can see, we are getting this error because the expected return value of this method is string, but we haven't returned that yet. So let's continue with the code. We'll add a switch statement where type would be taken as argument, and for the first submit case we'll return base class with button submit, and similarly for the case of reset we would return base class with button reset, and for the final default version we would return base class with button normal. So yes, as soon as I save this error would be gone because we are actually returning a string value. So let's just add the newly method that we created to the class name to actually make this dynamic. So I'm adding that class name with type and disable, and let me just delete this. So as you can see, everything is working fine as expected. Now just one version hasn't been implemented yet, that is related to disabled version. So let's just go back and add code for that as well. So it would be a simple condition. We are checking if it's disabled, we are returning base class with button disabled. Yes, as you can see, it's working as expected. So let's just go back to the button component, and one last thing we want to do is clean up the code a bit. Right now you can see we have about 12 to 13 lines of code written just to handle the class name logic. We can refactor this to make it shorter and more readable. I'll just comment this, and instead of this long switch statement we'll just return button common with template literal. If it is disabled we are returning button disabled, else a button with the given type. The normal version of the button hasn't been handled yet, so let's introduce a variable button type class. I'll just call it button type. It will check if the type is button, in which case it will return the value normal, otherwise it will take the value of type itself. So let me just copy and paste it here, and yes, as you can see, the normal version of the button is implemented as well. Let me go to the content component and add all variation of button that we have implemented so far. Also, you can see how easy it is to reuse button component, and you can create different variation of button. I will quickly make this content component dynamic by adding props to this, and pass this text to content method, and then go to the dashboard and add the text attribute to the content component implementation. As you can see, this component is dynamic as well. Just to summarize what all things we covered, we started with image component and added some dynamic props to it like source and title. We also covered how to create TypeScript interface and how to use them in component, and how it enforces type safety on props data, also ways to make props optional or pass different data type. We even saw how the component returns different value based on different data passed to it via props. Then we saw how reusable component became because of props. So that's it for today's lesson. If I missed anything or if you have any question, please add it to comment. I will try to answer them. Do hit subscribe and like this channel if you found anything useful here. In the next lesson, we will look into how to use event handling and state. Thank you for watching this, and I hope to see you in the next lesson.